Hi everyone, I'm the plant propagator and welcome to my channel. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about what I do, please subscribe to my channel. Today I'm going to try to present to you on a topic that's been really confusing to me for most of my orchid growing years, and that is the choice of the appropriate media for growing orchids. The media that I use in the laboratory, I know that, I understand that. I can tell you all about all the different media components for flasking of orchids. The media that I actually use to grow my orchids, that is confusing. It depends on the orchid, depends on the environment, it depends on everything, but I'll do the best that I can. There is no perfect medium. And the medium that you use, it depends again on the plant and your growing conditions. I can tell you the medium that I use for growing my cattleyas here in Southwest Florida. And what I'll do is focus, I think, a little bit more on that. There's a lot of different medium components. You can use straight media, you can use combinations of different media components, you can add the things together, and that's kind of what I like to do, is mix and match depending on the orchid that I'm dealing with. You have some that really love a lot of moisture, you have some orchids that prefer to be dry. What I like to do in order to gauge the appropriate medium is look at the quality of the roots that are growing through the medium, and that really is very critical. That's the most important thing. So you can pot up your orchid in the medium of your choice, and if you see roots growing, that's a good start, that's a good sign. The other thing that even makes it more confusing is that many of the medium components are organic and they'll break down, especially if it's warm. Right now it is 82 degrees. And it is a little after 5 o'clock p.m. So it's still a little warm where I am here in Southwest Florida, and under warm conditions the medium components, the bark and the sphagnum moss, are going to break down quickly. So even if you have something that you think is great and it's perfect, it's got to be replaced if it contains a lot of organic material after a couple of years, after 3 years. So keep that in mind as you go, and your orchid plant will give you a little bit of clues as far as looking at the root and root growth and general growth of the orchid itself. So I want to talk about a few of the medium components that I use for growing the cattleyas, which is the major thing that I grow here. The medium that most people talk about is bark, and bark is an excellent choice for growing cattleyas as well as most orchids. Bark, as you might imagine, comes in all different grades or sizes, and what I prefer to use with my cattleyas is the larger orchid bark. And actually what I should say is I mix all of my components together. So the bark that I prefer is right here, and I've shared this with you previously. So this is Orchiata orchid bark, and this stuff is great. It works real well. It comes in different sizes, and for seedlings that I use when I deflask seedlings, I pick the smaller size and I soak it and wet it before I transfer the seedlings into the bark, and I use pure bark for my seedlings. When I use bark for my cattleyas, for my larger plants, I mix it with other things. The other things that I mix with one of my other favorite components is right here, and this is lava stone, and these are I get this at the big box stores, and these are most people use them for landscaping material. So you put this stuff out. The thing about lava stone is this is stone and it doesn't break down, so it's really it'll stay there for a long time, and that's really one of the things that I like about this. The other thing that I do with lava stone, sometimes I grow my orchids, my cattleyas, in 100% lava stone. Again, there are different grades of this. You can get the coarse and the fine stuff, or this is actually a mix. But what I like to do with the lava stone is I like to put it in the bottom of my pots because it's a little heavier and it tends to weigh things down. I've talked to a lot of people that put styrofoam in the bottom of the pots for good aeration, and I prefer lava stone because a lot of my pots will get top heavy, and the lava stone tends to weigh things down if I put them in the bottom of the pot. It provides good aeration, Rich really is the main thing. You don't want the roots, you do not want the roots living in decaying material where they're just where there's no air pockets in there. And so the lava stone is always open and airy in the bottom of the pots, and the roots can always make their way down to that. So lava stone is great. Again, I mix it throughout the mix that I use. I always put it in the bottom of the pots that I have. This is getting heavy. I got to put it down. But again, you can buy this. It's relatively inexpensive at the big box stores. The Orchid Bark is a little bit more expensive, and there were some supply chain issues that I think are starting to relax now. The other material that I'm really loving and I'm really using a lot of is LECA. And there's different types of LECA. This is LECA, and LECA stands for Lightweight Expanded Clay Aggregate. And this is a bag of LECA. It's fairly heavy, and this is small. Let me grab some of these out so you can see them. So these are small LECA particles, and I like these. Again, these are it's clay, and this stuff is great. And a lot of times I like to mix this with the lava stone and the bark. But the nice thing about these things is the particles themselves are fairly smooth, so I think the roots can run along the surface of them pretty easily. And with some of my orchids successfully grown, you can see the roots growing down through either the lava stone, or you can see the roots growing down through the LECA that I put on the top. I should also say here's another bag of LECA, and this is great. This will last me a little while, and this LECA tends to be a little bit expensive, but because of the content, because of what it is, here, let me show you what this looks like. So these are much larger pellets, aggregates, and these again, they're larger, they're great, they're heavy, they can be reused, a little more expensive, but you can reuse this if you're interested. You can put this in the pressure cooker, you can put it in the autoclave and clean it up and reuse this stuff. And I'm doing that. I actually collect my used LECA, and I autoclave it and reuse it for my applications. The other thing is there's dust on it. So when there's dust on it, and the same thing so you have dust on LECA and you have that on lava stone. So whenever I pot up my orchids, when I freshly repot up my orchids, I always try to put water through it. And you can see, in the case of the lava stone and the LECA, you can see brown coming out of it. And you got to wash the dust off of the lava stone and off of the LECA. All right, so those are the components that I use, that I love to use for, but I'm still learning about orchids, and I'm still learning about what types of orchids grow in what media. I have not been successful up until recently in growing vandas, and I tried growing vandas in pots in lava stone unsuccessfully. I've tried just having the roots grow out, also unsuccessfully. And what I've been the most successful with very recently is just to strap them to the palm trees behind me. And not everyone can do that. Luckily I'm in a place where I can do that, and that's worked out very well. For some of the other plants I grow, the dendrobiums, I tend to have more bark in with the dendrobiums. With the catasetums, I tend to use bark and a little sphagnum. I don't use sphagnum for hardly anything, but I have mostly cattleyas. So the cattleyas are the mix of the larger bark and the LECA and the lava stone. When you look at the potting mix, there are reports that LECA is problematic because it raises the pH of your material and of your solution. And I got to check my email here. So I contacted the manufacturers of LECA. And what I got was a nice response from the company is called Hawthorne Gardening, and I contacted them and I said, "What can you comment about the pH changes that LECA provides material?" And again, I've seen multiple videos online from my YouTube colleagues, and they replied and they wrote me this following email. Hydroton is LECA, is inert and has a neutral pH. Any pH drift YouTube quote experts are experiencing is not related to the media itself. So I saw this as a challenge, and so what I did yesterday is I took some LECA and bark and I soaked it, some of the different LECA that I have here and the bark, and I soaked it in water and fertilizer. And so I have water here and I have fertilizer here. So I soaked it overnight in water and fertilizer, and I'm going to take it to the lab and check the pH of the materials, and I'll get right back to you on it. Okay, so here are the treatments. We'll run through them one at a time. This is water, and the water I'm using here is tap water. This next one is water with fertilizer. The next treatment is Orchid Bark with water. The next treatment is Orchid Bark that's been soaked in fertilizer. Next treatment is LECA, and these are the small and large LECA that have been soaked in water. This is LECA that has been soaked in the fertilizer, and it's the same fertilizer that I showed you earlier. This is washed or used LECA that was soaked in water. And finally, we have the washed or used LECA that's soaked in fertilizer. And taking a look at the water right here with the electrode in it and the pH meter, and what's happening with the water treatments, this has taken a long time since the water's not buffered at all. So this has been sitting here and the pH just keeps on going up. It's 8.2. I standardized the pH meter about 30 minutes ago. So this is pretty accurate. This is a good quality pH meter. And because again, the nature of water, it just, the pH fluctuates with very little effort. So what I'm going to do is take a look at all of the other treatments, and rather than having you wait and for each one to stabilize, because it's still not stabilized, when it's stabilized, it'll stop at the upper left, it's flashing, and it'll stop flashing, and it'll stabilize, and then it'll say ready, and then that's the readout. But it's been going up slowly, and it won't stop and say this is your pH until it stabilizes. So what I'll do is record all of the final pH measurements of all of these different solutions, and then that's what I'll report to you. So just so you can see, the ready light is on, and that is the final pH measurement of water. And this is just unbuffered tap water, just regular water. And this has been sitting out since for about 24 hours. So it finally did stabilize. I got a feeling it's just going to go up, but more slowly as we go. Okay, this is the final pH measurement of the washed LECA with fertilizer. So that's a pH of 7.74. So let me put all these together in a chart and see what we have. Okay, so I got all of the information here in my laboratory notebook as far as the pH of all the different materials that I looked at. I just again wanted to check to see what LECA and bark, for that reason, does to the pH of the solutions. And so it's interesting. So I checked the pH, and I'm going to put it in a table so that you can view this and we can look at it together. So the pH of water was surprisingly high. So in the laboratory, nice. I got a nice pH meter, and I standardized it, and it's a good one. It's what I use for all the media that I make when I'm doing flasking. So the pH of the water was 8.28, which is a little high, but what you have to know and what you have to consider is what water is. And water is not buffer, has no chemicals in it, and depending on the purity of your water, there's going to be no buffering capacity typically. So you can add anything to it, and your pH is going to go all over the place. I'm not sure why the pH was, 8.28, why it was, which is a little bit high. But it's water, and so water doesn't buffer. It's going to fluctuate all over the place. It took a long time, as you saw, for the pH meter to stabilize because the pH is moving up and down because it's just water. When you add the fertilizer to it, so I tried also just fertilizer, and when you add the fertilizer to it, the pH of that was 6.62 by just adding the fertilizer. And the fertilizer contains chemicals and components that are going to contribute to the stabilization of the pH and the buffering capacity of the solution that you use. So when you measure pH and when you look at the effects of any of these materials on pH with water, just water, the pH is going to vary it's going to vary widely. It's going to go all over the place because of the poor buffering capacity of just pure water. That doesn't mean anything, because what happens is there's going to be other components that are going to contribute to the buffering, and in the root system of your orchid, there's going to be also components. The orchids also secrete and exude compounds that are going to influence the pH and the neighboring pH. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Again, water, there's nothing in it. It's very poor buffering capacity as far as the pH goes. Fertilizer, again, the pH was 6.62. When you look at the bark effectively lowered the pH. In the water, the pH went down to 5.7, which is actually the exact same pH that I use in the laboratory for my media. So just bark mixed with water went down to 5.7. Bark with the fertilizer solution, it went down even lower. It went down for 5.28. So the bark tends to acidify the medium just a little bit. Again, I think these are minimal pH changes, and I don't think it's going to influence things. I did not do sphagnum moss. I assume sphagnum moss is going to do the same thing. A lot of these plant components will lower the pH of the solution if they're dried and if you're essentially extracting the components. When you look at LECA, just the unwashed LECA, so the LECA that has the dust, the pH of the water was raised from 8.28 to 8.86, so that was raised a little bit. But the LECA that was washed, it didn't change the pH of the water at all. So the pH of the water, 8.28. The LECA that was washed and then placed in water overnight, 8.22. All right, so absolutely, and I'm surprised that they're that close, because there's, because the pH of the water can just fluctuate for really very small reasons. So the LECA, if it's washed, doesn't contribute to really any pH change in water, which was kind of shocking to me. So what the representative told me about the hydroton particles, the LECA particles, was absolutely true. The washed LECA had no impact at all on the pH. All right, let's look at the fertilizer solution. Again, started out 6.62. With the LECA that wasn't washed, it actually raised it to 7.88. And with the LECA with a fertilizer, again with the washed LECA with a fertilizer, it raised it to 7.74. All right, so it did increase the pH a little bit, but again, it's a little above 7, I think that this really is insignificant. So these small pH changes really doesn't matter. So I'm fine. There's a lot of concern and alarm over what LECA does to the pH of water and solutions. My numbers do not show that, and it looks, unless you use fresh LECA dust, all right, the stuff that, and you wash it, the first watering, it's going to wash away. And so there doesn't seem to be a concern. So I'm going to keep on using, I love using the LECA. I did not test lava stone. And I'm going to keep on using all these different media components. I don't think there is a major alarm of any kind that comes up from pH alterations from using these various orchid potting media in your orchid plants. Again, the main thing is, I'm sure there's going to be alternates that are made, and you've got to, keep an eye out. And the bottom line is, if your roots are not growing well, or if your plants are not doing well, then you've got something to be concerned about. But right now, my plants are looking great. I'm going to keep on using the LECA and the lava stone and the bark, the Orchiata bark. But other mixes, there are commercial mixes where you can mix everything together, and as long as it's from a reputable producer, those are fine. Keep on using that. Bottom line with all of this is, try different things, experiment different things, be a scientist on your own in order to figure out how your orchids are going to grow best. That's all I have for today. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about what I do, please subscribe to my channel. Okay, that's it. Happy propagating.